Okay, I think we'll start the meeting. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome, and thank you for attending Schools Forum. It is always appreciated that you give time out of your busy schedules. And it's not too late to say Happy New Year, I don't think, although it seems a dim and distant memory. So before we move on to the agenda, could I just please remind people, if you could just remember to mute. I'm probably the worst culprit, but if you could remember to mute, please. It stops the feedback and makes things a lot easier. Thank you. Okay, Simon, over to you. So if you could just do the apologies and the new members, that would be appreciated.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So we've had just one apology so far, and that's from Claire Shaw. And also just want to take the opportunity to welcome Nicola Mason, or Nick, who's joined the forum as the new Secondary Academy representative, replacing Julie Rudge. Also, we've got welcoming back Alan Harding as the Secondary Heads Forum representative, replacing Jane Rutherford. And just to put on the record that we'd like to thank Julie and Jane for their contribution and support on the Schools Forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, welcome, Nicola, and Alan, you can't seem to escape, so welcome as well. Moving on to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Can I go to the floor, please? Has anybody got any declarations of interest? Lovely, thank you. Item 3 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of November. And I'm going to join that with item 4, which is matters arising. Those of you who know me by now, I don't go through page by page of the minutes, and I certainly don't go by part of the minutes. So let's go to matters arising first, and then we can make sure that everybody's happy with the minutes afterwards. Steve, I know you emailed in to Simon and myself a couple of issues that you wanted confirmation on. So do you want to pick up those issues for us, and we'll see if we can come up with some answers?
Yes, sorry, just checking I'm not muted anymore. Yes, thank you, Richard. Yeah, I sent an email this morning just to give a little bit of notice. But I know those of you who've been to Schools Forum for a number of years would be disappointed if I didn't have something to raise. The first two go together, really, which are on page 3 and page 5. The resolution at the foot of item 7 on page 3, which was about primary behaviour support service data being shared with forum members. And then a bit further down on page 4, it's just a similar issue. Additional information requested in the meeting to be shared with Schools Forum. I just wondered whether that information had been shared, because if it has, either I've forgotten it or it's landed not in my inbox.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Debbie Nash, can you pick that up for us, please?
Yes, of course, no problem. With regards to the request for information on the behaviour support, I haven't got the information yet for the full financial year, because obviously what we do is we collect the information on a monthly basis. So it was just a request really to ask if it would be acceptable to give you the information for the data for the whole of the year's contract, and provide that at the end of the financial year, and perhaps in the next meeting in March.
Sorry, Debbie, I couldn't press the button. That seems perfectly reasonable from my perspective. Has anybody got any objections around Debbie providing that annual information at the March meeting? Okay, that's great.
as
you.
I raised that's fine. And I'm sure Simon will minute it so that we don't overlook it next time.
Richard, I've got my hand up and I think it... Can I speak?
Yeah, sorry, I can't see any hands up, but yeah, is it you, Alison?
It is me, yes. Hello.
I thought I recognised your Dorset tones, yes.
Thank you
No
very
problem.
much. Waiting for you. I asked for additional data because I was concerned that we were looking at putting monies into this when we couldn't see any impact that it had previously had. And so I'm concerned that there's money being paid out for a service and we don't know how effective it is.
So was that the same question? Was it around the stuff that Debbie is dealing with, Alison? Is it the same question?
It's about the behaviour support.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think what Debbie has suggested is if we haven't got the data now, then I think obviously we need to be providing that at the next meeting. So if we could make sure that is available, Debbie, that would be greatly appreciated. But thank you for making the point. Thank you for making the point, Alison.
No, that's absolutely fine. One thing I did want to just share really though is obviously the primary behaviour support service, whilst it can support those children who have been referred to the service by the schools, obviously the impact of that intervention, we can get some soft outcomes in terms of what difference that has made. But obviously with some of these children that have been referred to the service, there are lots of additional factors that are affecting obviously the behaviour in the school. So it's just to sort of state that there may be other services involved, such as family support, early help as well. So obviously the outcomes in terms of exclusions may not, we may not get the outcome that's reflective of just that particular service, because there are the needs are going to be quite multifaceted in some cases.
Yeah, thank you for that, Debbie. That was, I'm just looking through the minutes, and that was minuted at the last meeting around the service was only provided to mainstream schools and the different agencies involved. But if we could make sure we have that data for the March meeting, that would be great. Thank you.
No problem.
Steve, I think you had one around transport. Do you want to articulate that one for us, please?
Yes, thank you. I've got two more points. One was as a matter arising on page 5 under historic commitments. It says forum approval is also required for the SEN transport budget of £250,140. This was now funded from the high needs block, which I didn't know and I was questioned. But later in the agenda for today's meeting, on under the high needs block item, there's a note which says on page 14 of the papers for today, the high needs block does not include the following costs: send home to school college transport. This is funded from the council's general fund resources. Now, I mean, it may be my lack of detailed knowledge here, but we were told last time that forum approval was required for the SEN transport budget, which is funded from the high needs block. And the papers today says that high needs block does not include send home to school college transport, which is funded from council's general fund resources. So it may be my ignorance, but I just wondered if that could be clarified.
Anthony, could you provide some clarity on that, please?
Yeah, there is an element of send transport charge to holidays block for 250,000 that needs your approval. It's a historic fixed amount that goes back. We'll probably know what year it was, but I'm going to say around 2014 it got fixed and hasn't been allowed to be changed since then. But you are still allowed to do like historic commitments. So when I say the send transport not funded from high needs block, that's actually a fib. There's 250 grand, but on the scheme of things, it's £22 million funded from general fund budgets. But that £22 million in general fund does have a 250,000 £250,000 in general fund budget. So when I say the send transport not funded from high needs block, that's actually a fib. There's 250 grand, but on the scheme of things, it's £22 million funded from general fund budgets. But that £22 million in general fund does have a 250,000 contribution from High Needs Block towards those costs. So for all intents and purposes, put it from general fund, but there is a small contribution that we are still allowed to charge to High Needs Block for 250k.
That's perfect explanation. Thank you very much, Anthony.
Okay.
Can I go on to my final point on the matter rising then, Richard, if I may? It's a very simple one.
No problem, Steve.
Very simple one, but on page 7, when the forum members didn't agree to the request for the 0.5% transfer to high needs, it's noted that the local authority was going to apply to the Secretary of State to overrule that decision. And in the papers for today's meeting, it said that at the time of writing the papers, that decision hadn't been, or there'd been no response yet from the Secretary of State. And I just wondered whether whether the local authorities had a response yet, and if not, if you've got any idea when it would be expected.
Okay, Steve. Obviously, we haven't got Tim with us today, so I think Andrew Marsden's on. Andrew, you any idea of when that might wash through?
Sorry, Richard, I've no understanding of the timing or the expectations. But if finance colleagues or any...
Oh yeah, I can come in on that. You're stealing my thunder, Steve, today. I was going to mention this later on. I'd hope to have heard by now. We normally have. Maybe that's because normally there's a straight outright no, so they don't. It's not very long. They don't have to deliberate over it. But at the moment, we haven't heard anything back yet. They've asked us to do effectively 2 census returns on the school budgets to look at one with, one without the transfer. That return isn't due until 20th of January. Will might put me right. It's around the 20th of January. So I'm not expecting to hear back until maybe the first week of Feb at this stage.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Steve, have you any other issues that you want to cover?
I don't know, you said you couldn't see hands up, Richard. Judy.
Yeah, Judy, I've seen you've got your hand up. Judy?
Thank you, Richard. Can I go back to item 6, notices of concern? It's on page 2 of the previous minutes. And it says that new notices of concern have been issued and Flashley Primary School has been identified. Now, they've had an academy order, but this has been delayed because there seems to be some complication about the deficit and no recovery plan. Can this be expedited so that their academy conversion can move forward?
Very good question, Judy. Mel, are you with us today? She's not joined us today. Unfortunately, Simon's telling me, Judy, that Mel isn't with us. She would perhaps have the answer, but I'm sure we can find that out after the meeting and make that an action.
That would be helpful, Richard.
Okay.
It obviously comes up under our school change forum meetings.
Yeah,
So,
we'll address that and make sure the appropriate people know, Judy.
Andrew's put his hand up, Richard.
Oh, sorry, Andrew.
Just a comment there. I don't think there's been any explicit reason why the current or the previous proposal for Flashley to convert has been down to deficit budgets. So I don't think that needs to be in the notes. It's more a case of the planned conversion has been postponed, shall we say? But I think, Judy, there may be a connection with finances, but it's not been explicit as part of that conversion. So just a clarification.
Thank you, Andrew. I think it does need to be a bit more clarity about this.
That's for the trust and for the school.
Okay, well.
Your question is absolutely valid. It makes absolute sense. Just what I'm saying is that in respect to the conversion process, it has not been, quotes, postponed, delayed, stopped because of the deficit budget, etc. So that's all I'm saying. It's simply
Right. Well, that's how this minute
Stopped.
this is how this minute reads.
All right.
Okay, well, we've been asked the question, and we will find the answer afterwards, Judy, and make sure that there isn't any barriers through that. Okay.
Thank you very much. Can I just move quickly forward? And I think this is for Andrew again. Page 3 about the Afghan evacuees that have been moved to Manchester. It says at the top of page 4 that it was confirmed that this information was not available at the meeting, but will be sought and shared with forum members. Have I missed that?
No, you haven't, Judy, and obviously that's an action that I can take forward with Andrew after the meeting, just to find out how many of those children returned. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is to find out how many children who remained in Staffordshire and remained in Staffordshire schools. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's fine, thank you. We can sort that out and send that on to you.
Very many thanks. That's lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Debbie. Your cup floweth over today. Okay. Are there any other matters arising from the minutes of the meeting of the 10th of November? I can't see anybody's hands up. If there are any, could you just shout out, because my eyesight is terrible? No? So let's go back to item 3. Can we confirm that the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of November are accurate of the meeting? Is anybody who feels that they're not? Fabulous. So we can write those off, Simon. Okay, moving us on to item 5, decisions taken by the chair under delegated powers. For the minutes, there were no decisions taken by the chair under delegated powers. Item 6, notices of concern and licence deficit agreements. Unfortunately, Mel can't be with us today, but I am assured there are no notices of concern. Item 7, a verbal update on the school budgets for 23-24. Will, that's over to you.
Thanks, Chair. This is just a brief update on the DSG allocations that we received at the end of last calendar year. So on the 16th of December, we got the allocations for the dedicated schools grant, which covers the 4 main blocks, being the schools block, the central block, high needs block, and the early years block. So I'll just go through the headlines of those. So starting with the schools block, the national funding increase, there's going to be a national funding increase of 5.6% on a per pupil basis, which includes an additional grant, which will be received separately to the main formula allocation. The rates within the main formula allocation have been confirmed as per the provisional allocation release in the summer, which represents a 2.4% rise for all factors, except for deprivation factors, that's free school meal and our EDACI factors, which have increased by 4.3%. This includes rolling in of the supplementary grants of 17 million that were received in 22-23. For 23-24, the government have confirmed an additional grant of £21 million, which will be paid directly to schools in May 2023. Combined with the main formula allocation, the per pupil increase is 5.6% for Staffordshire, which is in line with the national average. The grant will be passed on in full, in line with the government's per school allocations. We're still waiting for a decision on the 0.5% from the Secretary of State, which possibly we'll get early February, but don't really know. But working on the basis that we do get that decision in time, we'll have the budgets available with schools by the 28th of Feb.
Okay, Will, we'll just stop you there for a second. Have we got any questions around what Will has just said to us? If we can try and split it up a little bit rather than bombarding with questions at the end, I think it'll be useful. Steve, I can see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Just on that final point, Will, I mean, clearly that's pretty critical, isn't it, in terms of budgets going out to schools, whether that 0.5 transfer is approved or not. So
it certainly is.
I mean, what's if the decision is delayed? I mean, Anthony said earlier, thought perhaps by the beginning of February. But I mean, are you going to have a plan A and a plan B? And if the decision still isn't out by the end of February, what's going to happen then? Are you going to say that this is what you'll get if, and this is what you'll get if not?
No, I can't. The 28th of February is a statutory deadline, so I can't see the DfE putting us in a position where we're going to be in breach of the statutory deadline. The budget allocations that we produce, once we've got a decision, we can turn it around quite quickly. So I'm not particularly panicked by that 28th of Feb deadline at the moment. What it might mean is the budget documents which accompany it, you know, the headlines, the technical documents. Obviously, the context of those might change depending on the decision which is made. So there might be a slight delay in getting those out. But the actual budget allocation, I'm not worried at this stage about meeting the 28th of February for that.
So could I just make a suggestion then that if it does go to the wire, that rather than putting it all in the budget pack, you flag up those issues you just mentioned to schools a week or two in advance? I think that would be helpful. Yes,
so we'll communicate if it's going to the wire. We'll communicate through the school bag. That you know there might be a little bit delay in the budget documents which accompany the budget allocation.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much, Will. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Steve. Any other questions for Will on the bit that he's spoken about? Okay, Will, do you want to continue, please?
Yes. So moving to the early years block, the early years entitlements block will receive a further 20 million on top of the 180 million of funding or additional funding in 23-24 compared to 22-23 announced in the spending review. Local authorities will receive average funding increases of 3.4% for the 3 and 4 year olds entitlements and 4% for the 2 year olds entitlements. The 20 million increase is resulting in an extra penny for 2 year olds and the 3 year olds rate. So that takes the 3 and 4 year olds rate received by Staffordshire to £4.87 pence per child per hour, which is an increase of 5.6%. For 2 year olds, hourly rate per child has increased by 3.6% to £5.77 in 23-24. There's early years workshop plans for the 24th of January 23 with early years providers to discuss how this is passed on to providers as requested at the last schools forum.
Okay, thanks, Will. Have we any questions around early years? Phil, I think it's Phil who's got his hand up. Yeah, Phil?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, when you say it's 5.6, these are, is it not exactly the same as the figures that came out in the summer? Which was
no, there's 1p with the 20 million extra being announced. It means there's 1p more than what was announced in the summer.
Oh, that's really good news. Does that mean then that the gross rate that we're talking about is 25 pence?
It's I think it's 26. I think it's an increase of 26p. I haven't got those figures at hand, but that's from what I've got as in my memory for 3 and 4 year olds. I think it's an increase of
And it's
26.
the 20 million, and it's the 20 million that's made that difference, is it?
Yeah, it's 20 million, which has made that 1 penny difference. And there's a 1 penny increase on both the 3 and 4 year old rate and for 2 year old rate.
Right. Okay. I'm amazed, slightly better than we thought. Thank you. Look forward to the meeting.
Thank you.
Nice to see a satisfied customer, Phil.
He's not going to get it, Richard.
Will, back over to you.
Yeah, so the central block, the allocation is 5.4 million, which is made up of the historical commitments of 1.3 million and ongoing duties of 4.1 million, which is in line with what we predicted at School Forum in November. In fact, it's a £36,000 increase. So nothing significant there. The other block, the high needs block, Ants will cover a high level position in his report to come.
Okay, Will. Any further questions for Will? Have you concluded now, Will? Is that your report?
That's it.
Okay.
That's it, thank you.
Thank you very much, Will.
Okay.
Which leaves us going to item 8, which is the high needs block. Anthony?
Hello all. Okay. So yeah, this is the usual regular update on the latest position on the high needs block, giving ongoing pressure in this area. The forecast overspend now this year has worsened by 1.8 million from Q2. It is now 7.8 million. Probably not unexpected given the start of the new academic year, which always can lead to a bit of a jump in the forecast, given the new children that come into the system and the additional demand that brings with it. As previous, demand continues to exceed capacity, but so that's impacting specifically across the independent sector, with numbers now nearing 575 in the independent sector, nearly double what they were just 3 years ago. But given the fact they're more expensive placements as well, it does represent by some way the largest budget pressure in the high needs block. And indeed, that's where the majority of the increased spend has impacted since last time. Probably not so much due to increased numbers going in that we forecast, but more the increase in the average placement cost, which has gone up, and I suspect is or nowadays driven by the current economic climate. I'd also say there's been a small increase in the post-16 demand and the PRU placements, again due to increasing exclusions, which had dipped through COVID but are now back up to pre-COVID levels, and is a concern. Importantly, the paper also outlines the significant decline in the DSG reserves, which are currently in deficit by 8.6 million, but given the current forecast overspend, will go further overdrawn by the end of the year. Left unaddressed, and we spoke about this last time in November, the funding gap will likely increase, and by 26-27 could be, I estimate, around £22 million over budget, and by which time the accumulated deficit could be somewhere between 70 and 100 million. Given the financial situation, the council has brought forward a deficit management plan that was presented in outline to Schools Forum at its meeting in November. Coming out of that meeting, the High Needs Block Working Group asked for a follow-up session to review, on behalf of Schools Forum, the assumptions and proposals within the deficit management plan in more detail. That group, I'm pleased to say, met earlier this week, and I'd like to thank both Richard and Emily for their time and patience on Monday afternoon, what I thought was a very challenging but valuable session. Rather than put words in their mouth, Richard, I think it might be a proper time to bring yourself and Emily in for any comments or observations that you've got coming out of that briefing.
Yeah, you're not putting words in my mouth, Anthony. I'm going to go across to Emily first, because that will be good manners. Can I just ask a couple of things, Anthony? The workshop presentation that you did, I thought was very good. It was very succinct and very clear. Could could we get that PowerPoint presentation out to all members? Because I think that would be really useful. Is there anything in there?
Members Schools Forum.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll round that through Simon later. No problem.
So if we can get that report out to you all, I think it's about 12 or 13 slides, but it certainly provides a lot of clarity, certainly at the strategic level. It's not Anthony's role to be looking at implementation plans, but certainly at a strategic level, it's very clear around where the pressures are and what we need to be doing. I think it would be also, have you any objection, Anthony, that, for example, I pass that presentation on to Special Schools Forum? Because I think it would be really, really interesting for the special heads to have that as well. And
There's nothing controversial in there, so it can be shared openly.
Okay. Brilliant, and I would encourage anybody else who chairs any other forum, whether it's secondary heads or primary heads or early years, that they pass that out as well, because I think it is a really interesting document. So, Emily, do you want to...
Any queries on that can come back to me, if you like, as well.
Okay. Emily, do you want to just take the floor for a few minutes and try and encapsulate what we talked around last Monday, please? Are you there, Emily? Okay, it looks like it's over to me then. Okay, so we met with Anthony and Tim and Hallett on a Monday afternoon. The meeting took around 2.5 hours, so you can see what a difficult job it is for Anthony to present what he has to present to Schools Forum in probably 10, 15, 20 minutes. So I do encourage you to have a look at that presentation. The outcomes, the desired outcomes of the meeting was to give a deeper understanding of the DSG Deficit Management Plan, to look at the underlying forecast budget pressures, and to look at the forecast accumulated DSG deficit. And as Anthony has quite rightly said, that news is not positive. As we move forward, that's as we stand at the moment, unless we do something, then that deficit is going to become greater and the gap is going to become greater. And the final one was to propose savings to mitigate the shortfall. So they were the outcomes of the meeting, and that's quite an ambitious set of desired outcomes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think the profile, the 4 major items that the local authority needs to address, so the profile of spend and growth. Although there are 6 or 7, the four major outcomes, or the 4 major categories, is the increase in the mainstream provision spend. Obviously, as more education, health and care plans are being processed, there's going to be an increase. The increase in the special schools top-up and the profile of need that are in our special schools at the moment. I'm not going to bore you with an outline of the matrix, but the profile of Matrix 3, which provides for our more complex children, more of our children in special schools are now on that matrix than traditionally or historically have been, which obviously means an increase in spending. The continued planned places, the increase in planned places in our special schools, as again, which is a product of more children going through the statutory process, and the one that absolutely stands out, where we are hemorrhaging millions of pounds, is into the independent special schools provision, and the average spend per pupil in ISP is now at £55,000 per place. So they're the major pressure points. If you do get a chance to have a look at the presentation, Anthony's set that out well to describe what the challenges are, and also sets out what the major points are of the deficit management plan. Now, the deficit management plan basically is to stop that overspend. It won't address the accumulated deficit. it's almost like, you know, to put the brakes on, stop us overspending in each year and pull it back to zero. So it's about stabilising the system rather than try and pay back the deficit. And the major savings in that deficit plan is around the strategic realignment of provision across the sector. So to articulate that in layman's terms, what we're trying to do as a local authority is to stop the amount of children that are going into the expensive independent sector, to have the more complex children that at this moment in time are going into the independent sector in our own special schools. So we need to make sure that we're improving the curriculum offer in those special schools, so at tribunals we've got half a chance. And the third part of that jigsaw is to try and empower our mainstream schools to be more inclusive. So they're the three items that the local authority needs to address. But it's quite, you know, the one that absolutely sticks out and shines is the amount of money that we are spending in the independent special schools, which is going up year on year on. Not only in terms of numbers of children, but also in terms of the charges that independent schools are charging. So I've tried to encapsulate that in a few minutes. I do encourage you to have a look at that presentation. I think it's a really good job done by Anthony. And then it's around understanding how we're going to do that. And I think there are a number of work streams that are going on across the local authority that I'm assured by Tim that's reported into the SEND partnership group, and it's their role to be monitoring exactly you know, operationally what's going on. Judy.
Thank you, Richard. That's all of that is really helpful, and we understand the excessive costs of out-of-county provision. I just want to highlight the in-county provision for maintained schools who have challenging children, who they need, the school and the child needs some respite, and they look to the PRUs, but the costs for the school are exorbitant, and so the schools can't afford to send them on to a PRU, so have to carry on trying to manage the difficult behaviour of these challenging children. I'm obviously not going to get a response. So
well, I think obviously Tim's not here. I don't know whether Hallett is on. Hallett, are you on?
I am, yes. Hi, Judy. Hallett Halusi here. Yeah, I completely agree. It's a significant concern, and up until this point, we've not had a middle way or another methodology to support our mainstream schools. But that's the primary task of the strategy for special provision is to put a third option in the frame, if you like, to help our mainstream schools and young people and children. So the strategy for special provision is primarily looking at enhancing provision across the county to support schools in their endeavours to meet some of the challenging behaviour that we see from the children that they have on their rolls. So what we're looking to do is to enhance provision in localities, and it's going to be a shared school LA activity. The consultation for that particular model should come out early or towards the mid side of the spring term. We've got special heads, mainstream heads, clinicians, educators, all involved in those work streams. So I'm hoping that the model that's developed is going to be well thought through and a valid representation of people's thinking in this particular space. So that essentially should address partially one of the methodologies to address the concern that you're raising.
Well, thank you, Hallett. A couple of things. There are positive reports from schools when they have a child returned to them after that short stay in a PRU or alternative provision is very positive. So there does seem to be some value in enhancing that if and how possible. What is your third proposal?
So I may have misled you. When I said a third way, what I meant was that we have at the moment mainstream or special as the options available to us. What we haven't got in Staffordshire in any meaningful way, and I know that there are some provisions, but not nearly enough, is that enhanced resource-based provision that means that children and young people can access additional support without the need for an education, health and care plan. And that's what the driver is behind the strategy for special provision. There are other activities that we're doing, but the primary task is going to be to roll out a method of making provision without the need for any HCP.
Is that through alternative provision, APs?
It can be, but we're looking at enhancing special needs provision in settings. So where the old language would have been a resource base where a child perhaps who's got a profile that fits a diagnosis of autism would have additional support from a locality school that is additionally enhanced to meet need. And some of that work will be done in the home school, but some of that work might also be done in the enhanced provision itself. What we're looking to do is to remove barriers to accessing that sort of provision that we're going to be developing. So the access will be without the need for a label or a diagnosis and without the need for an EHCP. And there are lots of local authorities, particularly in the West Midlands, who run these sorts of methodologies. And the evidence around that is pretty good. As you quite rightly pointed out, children do return back into their home schools more contained, better adjusted and ready to learn. So I'm looking forward to sharing those proposals with colleagues going forward into the spring term.
Thank you, Hallett. That's helpful.
Okay, Judy, I think the point you make around PRUs, I mean, I can speak from the two PRUs that are in our trust. Certainly, they're absolutely full. You know, they're even at this point now, we're full to the brim, so it's very difficult to provide that extra provision. And while Hallett has been talking around resource bases, if I can just give you a bit of an insight into the one at Tillington, and Jonathan Price helped to set this up with a previous officer, Leslie Calverley. The Tillington resource base is a facility at Tillington Primary School, and it's a three-way process where the school provides the facility, the local authority provide the funding alongside the schools who have to buy into it, and then it's operated through the governance of Cicely Horton. Now, Cicely Horton is an outstanding primary SEM8 school, a specialist school. So all of those specialisms then can be filtered into the Tillington resource base. And basically, Judy, how that works is that those head teachers who spot young people very early on that are challenging their own behaviour policies can refer these children in. So it's an early intervention. So it works by catching situations and problems very early on and before they escalate, and hopefully returning those young people back to their mainstream school. But if that young person does need an education, health and care plan, and quite clearly some of them do, then that accelerates that process, because we all know how the challenges that can be and the pressures that puts on not only schools but on children and parents. And I think if we can replicate that across, that's one of the models. There are other models as well, but certainly the data that is coming out of Tillington is very, very positive. And if that can be replicated across the county, then I think, you know, we will be plugging the gap, because as Hallett quite rightly says, or has said on a number of occasions, at this moment the process is twofold, isn't it? We've got mainstream, we've got special. There's very little in between. So I think
Yeah, Richard, thank you. That, as well as Tillington, we know how positive their attitude is towards this and the results that they're getting. There's Littleton Green.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure there's another one, a similar one in
Tamworth Boxing Club is the other one, I think, Judy.
Right. However, I'm sure Hallett is working on making sure that all the other districts are getting similar provision. because it's a little bit patchy across.
Yeah, and to be fair to Hallett, it is a challenge. You know, the way that the Tillington was set up needs the cooperation of the three different parts to make sure it works, and that does take some time in setting up. And to have a willing primary school to enable that to happen is quite a challenge for some heads, I'm sure.
And a willing secondary would be nice as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'll be going out for expressions of interest shortly, and you can see what you're expressing an interest for when we have the model ready to share with colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Just briefly, I'd really just like to make a comment for the record. I'm not expecting a response today, so there's no need to put Hallett on the spot again, unless he particularly wants to jump in. But I could draw back through the minutes, but it is a good many years since we in the Schools Forum first highlighted the amount of money that's being leached away from Staffordshire Schools' budgets to pay for independent placements, and obviously the numbers have just increased almost exponentially since then. And we've been, every time it's been raised, we've been assured by different officers that the issue is being addressed and that strategies were being developed that would reduce the number of independent placements and therefore the amount of money we had to spend on them. And you know, I'm still waiting to see an effective strategy that actually starts to bring those numbers down. So I wanted to say that because I feel better for having said it, but I'm not expecting a response. Thank you.
Chair, may I respond? There wasn't a question in there, and I know that you're not expecting a response, but I feel duty bound to give you a response. Perhaps unconsciously, I think the statement required a response. We have got a good strategy. It's an evidence-based strategy. There is no silver bullet here, and we're pushing against a tide that's been created over the last 10 years, I guess. The more we've reinforced the use of independent provision, the more it's become a cultural norm for Staffordshire, both for parents and for schools. And we do get schools advising parents to look at our independent providers. And that's something that we're going to need to work together on to try and reverse that culture. What I would say to you is that I think the strategy is a good strategy. It's been well thought through. It's been co-produced with colleagues in all sectors of the education system and with parents as well. What our parents are telling us is they don't want the independent sector, but they're being left with no other choice. And I can assure you, Steve, that when we're at panel making these decisions, I will only sanction an independent placement where there is absolutely no other option. And we've exhausted those options. And the record, and we're being currently audited in that particular space. I have no anxiety about opening up that decision making to auditors, because when we do make that decision, it really is because there's no other option other than not making provision for a child, and that I can't tolerate. So I guess it's going to be the proof's going to be in the tasting, isn't it? So give me a chance to get this strategy up and running, and I'm looking forward to working with colleagues to help deliver it. I guess on that matter, I'll leave it there for the moment.
Thanks, Holly. I live in hope.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Steve. Just to comment that very briefly, I've made it no secret that over the years, how frustrated I've been with Staffordshire's inertia to create any implementation plan. They're very good at writing send strategies, but very little underneath it. But in defence of Staffordshire, this issue around the high needs block hemorrhaging millions of pounds out into the independent sector is not something that is just specific to Staffordshire. I think this is a national problem. Certainly in the 5 local authorities that my trust works in, they're having exactly the same issue. And in fact, their deficits certainly exceed what Staffordshire's are. But exactly what you've said is very true, Steve, that we've never really addressed this one in terms of actually doing anything. So it will be interesting to see where we go with this, and hopefully it's not a year's project. It's a massive piece of work, and we're not going to see the results or the fruits of this. It's going to take 4, 5, 6, 7 years for it to wash through, But yeah, we hope that we can address that issue, and it's outrageous that amount of money has been spent in the independent sector. On that note, Anthony, we'll bring you back in. Oh, I do apologise, Vicky. I can see your hand is up.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Richard. I was just wondering around point 23 on page 16 about the county-wide review of special provision. Does that include the independent sector?
Hi, Vicky. It includes them in that we're looking at the statistics and the demographic that we're sending out. I'm doing some work with the independent sector, but as you'll be aware, my ability to influence, and this is one of the problems in sending out into the independent sector, the level of control or power that I have to make change there diminishes exponentially. So I'm hoping to affect change in there by changing other parts of the system. I have been meeting with some of the independent sector, and I've also not agreed any uplifts that have come outside of the regional agreement process. So as it is today, one setting, happy to name them, have absolutely kicked off because we've not agreed, I think, 13 or 14 uplifts that they've deemed appropriate. And I've gone right back to them and said, we're not doing anything till you've gone through the correct channels. I'm hoping that they're going to cease those placements and we can bring those kids back home. But that also means that we're going to need to find places back home. So we're in a sort of a locked position here. The strategy does include and will include further with the special schools that we do have within the family, if you like. And I am looking to increase and work with those settings, their current capacity as we can. And there are limitations there. But I am doing some work with the independent sector, but it is limited by its very nature.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. Anthony.
Back to me. Okay. So I think when I signed off, I've just been talking about the work group on Monday. Thanks for that feedback, Richard. So the report goes on to confirm the forecast government funding for next year, and in particular, the core high needs block next year will be around £122 million. That's £7 million higher than in the current year, and it's exactly within where our forecasts assume the funding level will be within the deficit management plan. So unfortunately, there's no more core money than we're already anticipating. I am, though, pleased to say the autumn statement, and a bit more unexpected, the Chancellor did confirm a further 2 billion funding, of which 400 million will be directed to the high needs block. We estimate Staffordshire will receive nearly 4.8 million of that. However, will certainly help us because we're going to have to pass part of that on to special schools and PRUs, equivalent to 3.4% of their estimated grant funding next year. That'll be on top of the mandatory MFG payments. So it does come with conditions, but it is pleasing to know that we can probably live within the MFG and still pass on an extra 3.4% now to our special schools. I mentioned earlier on, but I should note again that we still await confirmation from the government regarding our disapplication request for the 0.5% funding switch. But obviously we will notify that once we are made aware. The report closes with a brief update on some of the continued work in the SEND space regarding, first of all, the development of the education banding tool, and the government's response to the SEND and alternative provision green paper, and finally some of the more recent SEND developments, including a highlight of some of the positive impacts we're seeing through the SEND and inclusion district hubs, the development of a new task and finish group designing a new pathway to support early intervention prior to request for an EHCNA, and as Hallett just mentioned, a county-wide review of the special provision in mainstream and special is now underway, and in the spring term we'll be bringing a consultation on the proposed strategy for implementation from September 23. Hallett mentioned the difficulty of impacting on the independent sector, but hopefully by reviewing that mainstream and special provision, it does have an indirect consequence and knock on on the independent sector and the reliance on that at the moment. Happy to take questions.
Any
Probably got most
questions?
off your chest earlier on.
Any questions for Anthony? I've got some, Ant. Don't worry, you're not getting off scot-free. No? Okay, Ant, can I just ask you a question around the supplementary grants in terms of special schools and indeed PRUs? You talked around there's going to be a 3.4% uplift that you have to pass on this year, and fair play to you. Last year you didn't have to pass that on. There was a 3% uplift last year, of which you passed
2.5% last year.
Yeah, but it should have been 3. You passed on 2.5.
Yes.
Okay. Some local authorities didn't do that, so we'll go back to last year in a second. But this year, when Will spoke around the schools block, he talked around a 5.6% uplift. If I'm right, I wrote it down as 5.6. Is there any reason why? Is there any reason why special schools are receiving less? Is that just a national thing, or is it?
It's just a national. What the government have set their, the uplifts that are afforded within the settlement. So we'll be doing 0.5% MFG most likely, and that will be the 2.5 that, as you just said, should have been 3. So they've set the MFG this year to be 3% over 2 years. They're trying to catch up on all those authorities that didn't pass it on. For Staffordshire, we did do 2.5. So there's a 0.5% there MFG we need to catch up on last year.
Yeah.
And then we've got this extra 3.4 on top that's going to be coming through this extra supplementary grant. So it means the MFG effectively, or the rise you expect to see in specials, is probably going to be closer to 4%.
Okay, so just for Alison Parr's benefit that she can then pass on to Special Schools Forum, will that 3.4% come in on a line, or will it come through the matrix?
It's going to be on a line. It'll be a specific payment. It's actually a set based on the 3.4% of your planned places value in the new year, plus 3.4% of your 22-23 top-ups.
Yeah.
So they've defined how that payment should be made. So we need to get through this year and close it down to see what your final top-ups were, and then we'll be calculating that, and we'll be liaising with schools specifically to say what that will be and how it's been calculated. So when you get your school budgets in, I'm going to say towards the end of February, I think is the deadline for getting the school budget set for special schools, there'll be a line at the bottom saying that a further payment equivalent to 3.4% of your top-ups 22-23 will be made during the year. I hope to get that out as soon as I can as a cash lump sum as early as I can in the new year.
Okay,
but
thanks.
It won't be passed on in the matrix rates.
Right, so it's easily understood, which leads me to my next question. If it is coming on a line that's quite easy to see and spot, my worry is this just a one-off payment, or is this going to be sustainable?
So the money's there again next year, and it's a specific payment, so it'll be again made next year. It's then what happens about the long term after that as they go beyond its next spending round, whether they roll it in permanently into the high needs block and then do an MFG to make sure it catches up and reflects that. But for right now, all we know is it'll be a payment for the 23-24, and they've indicated the money's there again in 24-25.
And is that the same for the schools block as well, Anthony? Is there a perception that this is?
I think the schools block has been rolled in. We'll probably be better to speak to that than I am.
Okay. And my last question, Anthony, is around the SEND capital funding. Have you received further SEND capital funding this year, and are you anticipating receiving it again next year?
I don't think any more further than what we've already got built into our capital plans, and we brought a paper, or Jonathan Price, actually, I think Jonathan on the line, brought a paper recently talking about how that money will be prioritised over the next 2 or 3 years in terms of spending. I'll speak off the top of my head, I think we wrote about £20 million we've got in the capital programme. I think that was an award over a couple of years, so I don't think there's been any more money added to that at this point. But the use of that is fundamental to the SEND strategy about ensuring the provision in mainstream and special is appropriate. So it almost like holds up the SEND strategy, is the effective use of that capital investment.
Okay, thanks, Ant. Has anybody else got any questions for Anthony?
Will, do you want to talk about what you just said about the supplementary grants being rolled into the schools block?
Yeah, Just to confirm that really, that the 22-23 supplementary grant has been rolled into the schools block. So when we talk
22-24,
about,
you mean?
no, the supplementary grant we received in 22-23
Oh, yeah.
has been rolled into the schools block for 23-24. There is going to be an additional grant in 23-24, which will be separate to the main formula allocation, and that's what makes up the 5.6% increase from last year.
So, Will, in layman's terms, that 5.6% is sustainable. It will come in year out. It's not just a one-off payment, is it?
No, it is sustainable, yes. So that additional grant will then be rolled into the main formula allocation for future years.
Okay, so Anthony, if that 3.4% remains sustainable, I presume that will be rolled into the envelope of the education banding tool, will it?
Yes, it will be. When we know it's there and rolled in, and we'll have to see how the government treat that about their MFG rules. But yes, we won't be seeking to, if it get rolled in permanently, we won't be seeking to withdraw that anyway. It'll be rolled into the matrix.
Okay, thank you.
So I suspect the government, having learned from what they did last year, will set an MFG and the year gets rolled in to make sure it happens.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Have we got any further questions for Anthony? Lovely. Thanks, Ant.
Thank you.
Which leaves us on to item 9, which is the date of the next meeting. Simon, can you confirm the date and the format of the next meeting, please?
Okay, thank you. So the next meeting is due to take place on the 23rd of March. That one will be a Teams meeting again, so I'll send the link out in a couple of months so it doesn't get lost. I think there's only three items on there, but obviously we'll get that a bit more information at the next meeting that we have when we're setting the agenda, and you should receive that mid-March.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Okay, before we all wave goodbye to each other, is there anything else? Oh, I think, Judy, you've got your hand up.
I just wanted to let Simon know that I've not received anything in the post with School Forum.
I'm really pleased you've said that, Judy, because neither have I.
Oh, I'm pleased.
Nor have I.
No, I was going to ask that question, Steve. Did anybody receive anything in the post?
I congratulated Simon last time because for a number of meetings, the papers have always arrived on my map the day after the meeting, and the November meeting, they actually arrived the day before, but I'm afraid he's failed this time. They'll come tomorrow. I'm absolutely positive they'll come tomorrow.
It's your fault then, Steve. You shouldn't have congratulated him.
That's it. I got carried away, Steve.
They usually come on a Saturday morning, so they're my weekend reading. Ha ha.
Okay, thanks, Judy. So we've got the date of the next meeting. We know what format it is. So I shall return to what I said at the very beginning of the meeting. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I know you've all got busy schedules, and we'll see you all at the next meeting. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.